This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
When this was all over, the beautiful Josephine Marcus would be waiting for Wyatt, not that peacock of a sheriff. Johnny could be past tense in more ways than one, but maybe almost by accident, he could wind up doing something about it. In the Dragoons, Wyatt and Doc flagged down a westbound passenger train. The engineer at first might have feared a robbery, but the 7 men were not wearing masks, and as the train drew closer, he recognized at least Wyatt and Doc. The engineer and the crew waited patiently as the 2 grit-covered men looked through the cars, probably making the passengers nervous. Anywhere Doc was, people got nervous, but they had nothing to fear. It was true that they were searching for a man with money, but this was money friends in Tombstone wanted Wyatt to have. No such man existed on this train, however. Time to get back on the trail before it grew any colder. Later in the day, the posse reached the ranch owned by Jim and Hugh Percy. It was customary in the more remote parts of the territory that when riders showed up, you fed them and their horses and gave them a place to sleep. Even adversaries put hostilities aside so as not to break the unwritten rule of frontier hospitality. But the Percy brothers were too frightened for that, what with all the killing lately. As he spoke quietly to the ranch owners, Wyatt was unaware that Barney Riggs and Frank Hereford had secreted themselves in the barn. It was possible they contemplated an ambush, perhaps waiting to see if the posse would bed down for the night. However, it was unlikely the 2 men, one of whom had been deputized by Behan, would have been brave or foolish enough to take on the 7 guests, especially with 2 of them being Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. A few hours later, the posse rode on. Wyatt was disappointed but not angry with the Percys. Legitimate ranchers had a hard enough time with the cowboys, with all their cattle rustling and other stealing, and that wouldn't change even with Curly Bill taken off the map. Being seen as giving aid and comfort to the Earp posse would make things even warmer for the Percy boys. It might be different at the next destination, because the owner of the Sierra Bonita Ranch, Henry Clay Hooker, was of another stripe. Hooker greeted Wyatt and the others with handshakes. His 250,000-acre ranch had been victimized repeatedly by the cattle-rustling cowboys, so any enemy of theirs was a friend of Hooker's, and he welcomed them into his spacious ranch house. Doc, especially, was surprised when Wyatt accepted the offer of a drink. Except for the very occasional small beer, his close friend's drink of choice since their Dodge City days had been coffee. Now, as Wyatt sat at Hooker's dinner table, he nursed a whiskey. To Doc and Warren, this was a clear indication of the stress Wyatt had been under since the week before, when he had watched his younger brother die in a Tombstone billiards parlor. The visitors were given a good meal and beds for the night. But Wyatt had underestimated Johnny Behan. While he and his companions slept, the sheriff and his own posse were on their way. Behan had not suddenly gotten any braver. It was more that the election the following November had gotten another day closer. Being sheriff of the new Cochise County had brought with it many more headaches than he had anticipated, especially in the aftermath of the October 26th gunfight. But Behan wanted to keep the job. Letting Wyatt Earp and his party get clean away would not play well among voters, especially those who disliked the Earps, and they were the sheriff's core supporters. So on that same day that the federal posse had ridden northeast into the Dragoons, the county posse traveled the same route. With Johnny Behan were a collection of cowboys, including Johnny Ringo, who could very well shoot Wyatt Earp on sight, Finn and Ike Clanton, who had their own dead brother to avenge, and the undersheriff, Harry Woods, whose newspaper, the Tombstone Daily Nugget, had been gleefully anti-Earp. They would eventually find their way to the Hooker Ranch, whose name translated to Beautiful Mountain. Before closing in on it, though, they bedded down and tried to sleep, planning on arriving at the ranch at first light. Wyatt figured the smart way to think was not if Behan and his force would show up, but when. In the bright morning, the lanky deputy U.S. Marshal sat with Henry Hooker to discuss courses of action. Sometimes the easiest was best, and that would be for Wyatt and Doc and whoever wanted to go along to ride east into New Mexico or south into Mexico. Either place, Behan had no jurisdiction. Everyone would live at least another day. No surprise, however, that the easiest way was not Wyatt's way. He could not stomach the thought of the sheriff returning to Tombstone, boasting he had booted Wyatt and Morgan Earp and Doc Holliday, and their equally